but candles will burn, and time will reveal all that you've done and the money you steal. The suffering you're causing gives you no pause for thought. You've got your claws in the dead summer's heart. Birds will return, as the birds always do. When they come home to roost, they'll feast on you.
So you have the artifact this week?
I do. I have a double feature.
Uh-oh.
Mm-hmm. But they're both little. Yeah, we're going to talk about my favorite liberal of all time, Glenn Greenwald.
Like a classical liberal.
Yeah, like there'll be a really smart biographer one day who writes a biography about Glenn Greenwald, and it'll be called The Last Liberal. I've said this to other people, and it irks people because people hate him, and there's good reasons to hate him. But I've always had a begrudging respect for him because I feel like whereas all these other people lie all the time about what they actually think, he, I think, is honest. Or at least when he's trolling you, he's like knows he's trolling you, I guess. He's got like a lawyer's mind. So
he's a civil liberties liberal.
Right.
Which is a particular type. He's like an ACLU liberal.
Yeah.
And those ones always annoy like liberals.
Right. Like
because they'll die on the hill pretty quick.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean liberalism exists. Well, okay, so this is how ideology works. You ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
In order to have a revolution, you have to have things that you think about the world that are true. If you have a bunch of fake shit you believe about the world, then when you try and actually do something in the world, you're going to fail to do it.
That's, I think, materialism.
Right. And so all ideologies that are, when they're revolutionary and have actual revolutionary potential are material, at least to some degree. This was true of liberalism when it was a revolutionary idea opposed to feudal absolutism, right? Otherwise, we would still be having people in cafes talking about how great liberalism, and we'd all be ruled by a king. Like, they obviously were able to foment a revolution successfully and change society successfully based upon some ideas about how things could be implemented and for that to work, right? But what happens after the revolution is that ideologies immediately become counter-revolutionary because they need to hold off revolution against them. So liberalism goes very rapidly from being a revolutionary ideology that's, you could say, is in touch with reality to one that's basically there as a self-justifying layer on top of real thing that they're protecting that is meant to undermine like progressive forces by having them have to dance around a bunch of stuff that's like for example, like your slate of DSA candidates that just won, like liberals can, because it's not grounded in reality, they can do this dance where right now there's something important and specific about Democrats, which these people are not. And the addition of the outside other threatens something essentially true about what a Democrat is, and therefore undermines the party fundamentally, right? So that's the attempt to forestall like pressure from the outside. But then when there's something outside that they want, right, then becomes an ideology about pragmatism. We need the Liz Cheney Democrats. We need to invite this big tent that invites like blue dogs and like people who don't agree with the core party planks, but can give us votes that we need to like prevent the Republicans from winning, right? So you can have everything all ways because it's not an ideology anymore that's grounded in a specific political project besides the maintenance of the current situation, and it's as an ideology is flexible enough to undermine any sort of challenge, right? So that's how ideology functions. And what it means essentially is they don't believe anything. When we say they don't believe anything, that's what we mean, is they dance from idea to idea, that today pragmatism is primary, tomorrow the essence of the ideology is primary, and that they don't even look like they're doing this dance because it's just whatever the argument is. But the liberalism, it gives them like a framework that they can operate in, which everyone is familiar with the language of it. Everyone can understands that they've been fed it their whole lives, right? So they can say, well, I guess I can see your point. Is at least that, right? Even if it's not convincing, it's at least like some sort of justification for then attacking the DSA in this case. Glenn Greenwald became famous during the Bush administration for being like, this is a very illiberal government.
Mm-hmm.
We're all supposed to be liberals, and this is crazy. And of course, the liberals loved him throughout that entire, like, the Iraq War and all this stuff. And then Obama gets into office, and he does the same thing. He goes, wow, this is illiberal. Like, I can't believe he said all this nice stuff, and then he did all this illiberal right-wing shit. Like, that's crazy, y'all. And no one wanted to hear it. All the people that loved him to death in the 2000s hated him 2008, 2016. They could not stand that he was reminding them that they didn't have any principles, that they were using the language of liberalism against Bush because they were partisan hacks, and he was doing it because he actually believed in this stuff and thought that would be a consistent through line through politics. So he got banished basically to the political edges since then.
I mean, after his ascendancy, he also got a little bit harsher and more troll. He got trollier as he got older.
Yeah.
But I agree that his political positions, like, have been are consistent. He's a ACLU liberal, like bordering on libertarianism, but he's a true liberal. Like, that's true. It's true liberalism, and he critiques everyone the same.
He's a little
enjoys going on Tucker Carlson and stuff. Like, he's got a vibe about him. Yeah. A liberal like him, you're gonna be particularly critical of, like, bullshit Democrats.
Yes,
because they are supposedly the party of liberals.
Yeah, you could say that you probably wouldn't be as much of a Trump apologist as he can be sometimes.
But is he really a Trump apologist?
He has moments where for example, there were people during Trump 1.0. They were very, very excited to hear, like, these op-eds that were like, we're not letting Trump anywhere near. Don't worry, we got it. We're undermining this. And he was like, he was democratically elected to be your leader. And you can see the state defending itself from a democratic decision. The state has no interest in the fact that more people voted for this man, or at least... I mean, this is the thing with him. He makes a very consistent argument. He's a lawyer. He's the kind of person that makes an argument that's, like, in many ways I would call largely devoid of content. But he's saying, this is the system that you believe in. If you believe in it now, you believe in it in 10 years from now. You believe it when the fascist is in government, or when the mini-fascist is in government. Like, be internally consistent. And I'm sure that drives people crazy. Mm-hmm. But, like, of course, like, that's to me extremely expected, and not apologia, because that's his modus operandi. That's not how I make decisions about things. Right. But, like, I very much am not an ACLU liberal. Like, I think that's, like, if the Ku Klux Klan comes to town, I think we should kick him out. Right. But of course, Glenn Greenwald would always tell you the Ku Klux Klan should be able to walk down Main Street. That's right. He said if anyone can, they should be able to as well. And our politics are consistently, like, what they want is what's in operation. Right. That's the center of the conversation, not the right or not right, but, like, what are you saying? Mm-hmm. And he is very consistently that is irrelevant, right? That's not what liberalism is about. Is not exploring that content. And I think as time goes on, there was this campus movement that really leaned into that, which is like, we are not liberals. We do care what you're saying. We are going to cancel this event because it's racist, not because we believe, well, whatever it is, that the freedom of speech is formally limited by who we decide, but, like, what you're saying is what will decide whether you should be allowed to speak or not on our campus. And he objected to that, and that made him kind of outs with, like, the woke left. I think his fundamental disagreement with that approach. But so I don't agree with him, but I do respect. I wonder, does he even disagree with that from a free speech perspective, or just from what he thinks is best in the marketplace of ideas? Because walking down Main Street is different than getting to show up to a private university and give a talk. Anyways, he's bitten the bullet. Yeah. He's fully bought in. Mm-hmm. And I respect him for it. Yeah. So anyway, of course, the artifacts I've picked are because he's not internally consistent on this particular issue. However, I'm not going to give him a lot of grief for that, because I actually think that we don't value being internally consistent. Right, no. We just change our mind depending on what's going on. So, no, this is a topic in which it is internally contradictory, and he's trying to deal with the contradictions of what is an explosion of independent media and sort of the fall of legacy media and his place within that. That's a complicated topic. And he is completely reader funded now on Substack. He was at one point part of the founding people, co-founder of the Intercept, and he got chased out of there or quit or something happened.
He said he was getting censored because of his anti-Biden criticisms.
Right. So now he's completely reader funded.
He's Substack. Substack. He's all Substack.
I think he's all Substack. But and it does very well for himself on Substack. He's, I think, one of the top like 5.
Right after Barry Weiss.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so here we go. This is number 1 is an X post. You may remember that Twitter is now called X, the everything app.
That's the tagline? The everything app?
Yeah.
People use that thing for nothing.
Yes.
Only very small, just a little niche. Doesn't even do it that well. Okay. The everything app. What does he say on the everything app?
He says, well, he posts a picture of a graph. This is percentage of Americans with a negative view of Israel. Source, Pew Research Center. There's 3 different groups: young Democrats, entire American public, and young Republicans. Young Democrats' negative view of Israel is 62% in 2022, 71% in 2025, and has jumped from 2025 to 2026 to 84%.
Wow.
Entire population is 42% in 2022, 53% in 2025, and 60% in 2026. And young Republicans is, again, this is negative view of Israel, 35% in 2022, 50% in 2025, 57% in 2026.
Interesting.
So he says about this graph, if someone had told me even just 5 years ago that there'd be a collapse of support among Americans for Israel, this radical, I wouldn't have believed it. Drastic, rapid changes in public perception like this are possible only with internet freedom and independent media.
Okay.
Got it?
Yeah.
All right. I guess his point being that before the rise of independent media, legacy media was really centralized. That really did what the wealthy controllers wanted it to do, and that they would never report on what Israel is doing to a necessary degree to get people to change their minds about it.
Okay, sure.
Right.
I mean, we are seeing mainstream media not cover. Maybe that's shifting now, but largely not. They have not covered.
That's correct.
The war.
Right. And that's where the famous TikTok, dead babies, TikTok showing all the kids these things they don't want you to see.
Right. And then, the New York Times is trying, I think, to save face now, which we can talk about by putting some things in some parts of their paper. But, they were using the passive voice the whole time. They're still not covering. They are beginning to cover, they did cover the UN agency coming out this week and saying there's evidence that they were deliberately targeting babies. So the New York Times put that in their paper.
Yeah.
But
you have to wonder whether they're only putting that in the paper because public opinion now sees the glaring gap of it and knows it's there. Right.
They had to catch up.
They did. And they had to save whatever legitimacy they had left.
Al Jazeera is not independent media. What are we defining independent media?
I don't think that would count, no.
Is Tucker Carlson independent media?
Yes.
Because he's self-funded?
Sort of.
Okay. And Joe Rogan is independent media?
I guess so.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I guess you'd have to ask him what he means. I would say anyone that's not part of a legacy media outfit, but Al Jazeera is funded by the Qataris, right? Almost completely. And Joe Rogan is obviously funded by a bazillion big companies, right? So I don't know. He probably doesn't mean people like him who are only funded. He probably include DropSite, which is reader funded, but not only. They also have investors. So
there is absolutely a general trend that traditional media, starting many years ago, traditional media got in big trouble. All local newspapers couldn't stay open, and then the big newspapers couldn't stay open, and they've been closing their foreign correspondence desks, and mainstream traditional media has had crises for about the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And it has gotten more and more centralized and owned by fewer and fewer people.
Mm-hmm.
And they have shut down more and more journalistic operations. So 2 things have been happening. If you want to have journalism, most people who want to do journalism have to do it independently because they literally can't get the jobs. And journalism is underfunded because you cannot be an investigative journalist with no money because you just started a Substack. So there's an infrastructure problem that also creates a content and a fact-finding problem.
Yeah.
People like Glenn Greenwald and Tucker Carlson, those who come out of legacy media, are privileged to be able to build an audience out of nowhere and suddenly be funded.
That's correct. And that pipeline is going away.
Right.
And it's also a pipeline that produces way too many political commentators and
Well,
not
that's
enough
the other
investigators.
thing,
So there's like
is
a
that-
very large commentariat and a very small like
Yeah.
investigative journalist.
So
spot.
as traditional journalism dies, the cheapest thing to do is just have to produce people who reproduce commentary and content. So they're not doing journalism; they're just doing meta commentary on meta commentary endlessly. That's the content sort of generation, like the way that news we do a lot of content generation, and anyone can do that. That's cheap. I mean, we're doing it. We don't have an investigative journalist budget.
It's only time. It doesn't cost us any real investment.
Right, and we're cribbing off of other people's content.
In fact, we're just copy pasting it off of our 3 favorite podcasts.
Yeah. And then we're just having hot takes, which is not journalism. And that's not...
Yeah, I mean, it's not journalism,
well,
but
I
take your point.
I honestly think we're the best version of it on the internet. But it's like that's what most of the media is now. Anyways, there is a crisis of journalism that is not... I don't believe can be solved through Substacks.
No. And to add to that moral panic a little bit, when I was looking for videos of what was going on in Israel at the start of the Iran war and how much of the attacks on Israel was actually getting through because it didn't seem that it was going to be reported, I was scrolling TikTok and probably 75% of what I was looking at was AI.
Yep.
And I think that's the real threat to the internet freedom argument is I do think in this case, internet freedom is pretty important. As much as independent media, if those two things are separate, internet freedom, which is like posting stuff that would never get posted on like CBS. And the way that you destroy that is not by restricting it, by flooding the zone with stuff that's unreliable to the extent that you then have to crawl back to legacy media as the arbiter of like what of this is actually true. And they'll tell you that things that are true are AI. Eventually that's what we'll get to is.
Yeah, there's I wrote about that for the Substack.
You did?
In November.
You did indeed.
Yep. So
what's the name of that article?
Beyond the Dead Internet, Building Truth After Capitalism Broke the News.
Yep.
So I wrote about that back in November for the Substack.
Mm-hmm. Pretty good article.
It's going to be behind a paywall now, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Beyond the Dead Internet, Building Truth After Capitalism Broke the News. But that gets into like the internet, quote unquote, killed traditional news. And was this whole, like, this is how we're going to democratize media and information. And that's got some promise, but it's not as simple as that. But the slop generation of AI and there was just slop generation before large language models started doing it. People were just producing, shitty content as quickly as possible because that's what got you the likes.
Mm-hmm.
That just is now on overdrive. And now you don't have a vetting process for what is the vetting process for information. If it's not a traditional institution, like, it was at one point, it was newspapers. At one point, it was Walter Cronkite. If we don't have the institutions, and there's no trust in those institutions anyways, but they literally don't have the infrastructure they used to have. And you have this sort of like false promise that we democratized media, which we didn't do, but there's a belief that we did. And there are alternative media sources. And then it just gets flooded with slop where truth becomes much harder to find.
What there needs to be is sophisticated tools which detect AI interference, and then those tools would then take your feed and filter out. But they won't give us that, but that is what needs to happen. It's like the same thing as cybersecurity, essentially, except for it would be like information security. It would be what would happen. I don't know if we're actually looking at that being a possibility, but
I don't think you can look to. I think the major point I would make is that you cannot look to old institutions or corporate powers to provide you the tools for how to sort through this mess.
Yeah.
And so building a true alternative to like capitalist media requires building a different system of media, and media literacy work needs to be done differently and governed by different institutions. If Claude produces is this AI bot for you as you consume your news, you can be certain that you shouldn't trust it.
Yeah. I wonder if that's an application for the blockchain. Like a blockchain can give you the authenticity of a particular piece of media because it has a trail back to the original.
Yeah,
upload.
and then there already are things like that out there, but I think that you're looking for a technical solution when the solution is
political.
Teaching people, yes, a political education that includes many things about media literacy, but what media literacy is critical thinking and political education.
Sure. No, but I would say that my media literacy skills are at least above average. And the problem for me was not that I was believing that Israel was a crater. My problem was that there was no way to tell what was real and what wasn't. So it became a fruitless exercise in trying to find out what was actually happening.
Oh, yeah.
That was the real problem, was not that I believed fake stuff, but there was no way to sort through it. And therefore I had to wait for some other arbiter of what actually happened to tell me what was going on.
That is one thing that journalists have traditionally provided, is sort of like journalists and researchers and academics is that they will sort through information and provide it credibility and give you the synthesis of the information. And that's never been perfect. I do think, though, that A, there's much less of people doing that, because there's less infrastructure and funding. And B, we now have an expectation that you can get answers immediately, that anyone can type anything into a chat interface and get the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
So you were like, I'll figure this out. And you probably couldn't figure it out. But I think the expectation that you get reliable, sourced, informed, insightful information by just asking Claude is that's the lie.
All right. So anyway, this is now a video he posts. I guess once a week he does these long form videos where he does question and answer. And he starts this one by talking about his Jubilee debate. You're familiar with Jubilee?
No. Is that the one where they all sit around in a circle?
That's right.
And he has to debate I'm going to debate 15 stupid college kids.
Yeah. So it's a YouTube channel.
It's a Charlie Kirk, and it's like a homage to Charlie Kirk now.
A little bit. It is like a content mill, and it's a very popular YouTube channel where they have some famous person on a topic, and then they'll have a bunch of other people, some of them like YouTubers or other talking heads, some of them just randos, and they'll debate one at a time over a topic. So his topic was that the Trump administration is far more corrupt than the Biden administration in very important, serious ways. And
seems right.
He talks a little bit about these people are screaming and yelling and not listening, and they have no ability to have a conversation, which I think is probably true. He said not all of them, but that was really the story. It was this disturbing inability to actually have an exchange, because as soon as you start responding to what they just said, they start screaming and yelling over you, things like this. The other thing, this is the other thing he says. So I'm going to play the clip.
Amalgam of it is that there's widespread systemic corruption of the kind that we typically regard as the most dangerous, which is where the very people on whose behalf the administration is acting are giving money, shoveling money directly to the Trump family under the guise of investing in their companies or their hedge funds or their contracts. Now, if somebody wants to come make a case that it's not corrupt because of this, or somehow I've described it in a factually inaccurate way, I'm all ears. But the issue was, even though the proposition was the Trump administration is considerably more corrupt than the Biden administration, the people who came as part of this MAGA group to dispute that proposition had no idea about any of it. Nobody could engage on the actual transactions because none of them had ever heard of it. It was very evident. Once I started realizing that, I was trying to make that manifest by asking them specific questions about the deal. And they kept saying, even if I presume I kept saying, don't presume anything. I want to know, am I describing this accurately? They couldn't. On the break after that segment, the moderator said, if you learn that Glenn's description of these transactions is accurate, how many of you would agree that this poses a serious problem of corruption? And a lot of them, maybe even the majority, I don't remember, raised their hands. But what this shows to me is, obviously, I'm a huge fan of independent media. I think nothing was more vital than taking power of information dispersal out of the hands of the corporate media and diffusing that control that erodes the ability of centralized propaganda for the state, for corporations. It gives people options to hear things that are sources that they trust. I'm a huge fan of it. I've devoted, the latter part of my career to independent media. I've always been an advocate for it, still am. But nothing in life is all good, and there's definitely downsides. And one of the downsides of independent media is that the easiest model for succeeding, for making money, for growing your audience, is to just plant your flag in some camp, whatever it is. Could be a partisan camp, could be an ideological camp, could be a camp in servitude to a politician, AOC or Trump or Gavin Newsom or whoever. And all you do is just feed these people what they want to hear, what reinforces the unifying belief that brought them to that sector of independent media. And the one thing you can't do if you're driven by profiteering or success in terms of building a large audience is tell them things that alienate them. Tell them things that challenge their most closely held views. And as a result, it seems pretty clear to me that these MAGA people, and some of them are kids, some of them are older, clearly they consume political media. There's no doubt about that. Like I said, they were more well-versed than, say, the average person about the war, Iran, about foreign policy, not much more, but they had like more factoids that they could spit out and were more prepared with like talking points. But the independent media they're consuming, my guess is like they watch a lot of Ben Shapiro. I really would be surprised if that weren't the case. I'm sure they watch Fox News and people who are on Fox News, these kind of people, probably some very pro-Israel, pro-Trump podcasts. This media they're feeding on doesn't tell them about these corruption scandals because they're incentivized, the people are who manage these media outlets, not to tell them, because if you start criticizing Trump or suggesting he's corrupt in any way, you're going to drive away the people who don't want to hear it. And there are a lot of people who don't want to hear it, especially if you built your media little media fiefdom based on people who love Trump and they come to you to love Trump. And once that you get hooked on that revenue, on that subscription, on the advertising money, on the audience numbers, you're very incentivized not to drive them away by telling things they don't want to hear, including things that would upset them. You're basically imprisoned by or captive to your own audience. And it's a very sad thing to do, but I understand why people do it, because it is the easiest way to make money off of podcasts or independent media or YouTube shows or whatever. And I think it's a huge problem. And I mean, I remember this from when I spent a lot of time denouncing the corporate media for spreading the lie that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, which they got from the CIA, from all those old anti-Trump CIA guys like John Brennan and James Clapper, the whole U.S. security state crowd. And I couldn't believe it. It was so obviously not Russian disinformation, but they also were incentivized to tell people that it was, because their audience, CNN's audience, the New York Times audience, MSNBC's audience, all of them were Biden supporters who desperately wanted Trump to lose. And they had to find a way to discredit the reporting based on Hunter Biden's laptop about what he was doing in Ukraine, what he was doing in China. And when I would talk about this, the fact that the media lied, the intelligence community lied, many, if not most people who were liberals or on the left had no idea what I was talking about. Like, they couldn't tell you what the issue was. I remember a couple of big liberal media people said, can someone just explain to me what this Hunter Biden thing is about? I really don't, because it's just not part of their media world. Just like these corruption scandals weren't part of their media diet. And I think it's very alarming. Not that the corporate media doesn't deserve what they got in spawning an independent media because people lost trust and faith in them. That was completely well-deserved. I understand why people don't trust corporate media. But independent media has its own bad incentives, its own corrupting structures and dynamics. And I really saw it kind of visible in a very visceral way during that discussion.
I mean, I think the point he's making is pretty obvious, that like you get your niche audience and you tell them what they want to hear and you entrench further and further and further. And obviously that's the best money making scheme, right?
So why haven't we done that? I mean, we just go out of our way to alienate our audience every single episode.
Yeah. Sorry, Mom. But
one day we're pissing off the liberals, the next day we're pissing off the anarchists, the next day we're pissing off the
boomer parents.
Yeah, the boomer parents.
And my uncle says I swear too much. Anyway. I mean,
from now on, it's all pandering 100% of the time.
So obviously, you're right, Glenn. I think what is more interesting or alarming is that this coincides with a crisis of like shared facts. So he was trying to have a debate about corruption, and he found that he was debating people who had no information about the corruption, what he was calling corruption. And I think that's not just because they're consuming media sources that are like one-hit wonders on what they're going to cover. It's because our society has moved pretty far away from previous iterations where there was relative trust in traditional institutions and many, many, many fewer content options. So what what Walter Cronkite was broadcasting in the 60s, a lot of state-sponsored propaganda? Yes, it was. But there was a lot more shared factual basis. There was a set of shared facts that people were entering more conversations with.
Yeah.
So they were not starting basically on two different planets and then having a conversation. They were starting on the same planet with the same facts and then having a conversation.
Right.
That is lost.
And by virtue of that, the difference that they were arguing about was much smaller.
Was generally much smaller,
Right.
or was like super value oriented and not like here. People argue a lot about many debates these days are like either factless or they're arguing about the veracity of facts.
Yeah.
Or what they believe is happening versus what the other person believes is happening. So you don't even necessarily you don't have a nuanced disagreements or you don't necessarily have value-based disagreements because you're actually arguing about what you think is real.
That his experience on Jubilee was essentially, and he doesn't really say this explicitly, but it was essentially people who had been very well trained by their media diet not to accept that this could possibly be true. Right. Not to actually be informed on the issue, but to understand that their duty was to outright reject it as being true.
Yeah.
And to counterattack with something else.
Yeah. There's pretty trust in media and like polarization in a society are pretty well documented like trends. And Gallup has been doing long-term polling on people's trust in media, and what they're polling is trust in traditional media, and it was at its highest in 1976, and it's at its lowest now, which is below 30%, and it stayed in the 50s in the 90s and 2000s. So through the weapons of mass destruction stuff, through the beginnings of more increased political polarization, media trust did not drop as severely as it's dropped in the last 10 years, and it is much lower for people who call themselves Republicans.
It's ironic because my strong belief is that the Iraq War is what killed legacy media and basically institutional trust. And it is true, I think, that the main thing functioning here is that the lies you have to tell to justify the system and the realities of that system are spreading so far apart because this rise of fascism is about a collapse, and the collapse requires them to do crazier and crazier things and tell bigger and bigger stories about those things to justify them.
Yeah.
Right. So you get situations where you're literally responding to pictures of a genocide with, well, doesn't have Israel have the right to defend itself? Right. Like this could be, you could rein in Israel a little bit more and tell a little bit more of an honest story about what's going on in the past. And so even though it was a fiction orchestrated to get you to go along with things that were not in your interest, it didn't have to stretch reality quite that far.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Iraq, where they obviously participated in selling this war. It was on a completely fraudulent basis. It's very hard to believe that the people who were in the media were, at least if they didn't know that it was a lie, the absence of skepticism was political, right? People got raises and people got fired based upon the absence or presence of an acceptable level of skepticism about the administration's claims. And everyone saw that play out, right? And I think from then on, you had people like, I understand now that these people are lying to me, that their job is to convince me of things that are good for other people and not for me. So now I'm going to go find someone who's I can trust because maybe they're more like me, they have more values like I have, and maybe it'll be a niche thing. And that's how you end up with this explosion of like mistrust in mainstream media over the past 10 years.
Yeah, there was a big drop. There was a big drop in the early 2000s. The biggest drop happened in the 2016 presidential election.
Right.
And I think it's because the political polarization and the media circus on overdrive around that election. And then the way traditional media was folding and led to like a significant drop for Republicans.
Yeah.
Everyone was dropping, but young people and Republicans were dropping most significantly.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's not as much data on this, but like, do they trust when you say, okay, that's your trust level in traditional media, what's your trust in alternative media? I bet you it's not that high on whole, They probably trust their
That's
sources,
right.
but they don't trust alternative media generally.
That's right.
Which means you're swimming in most people being like, I don't trust most of the things I'm coming across.
That's right.
Or in most of the things my neighbors are consuming.
Right. You understand that everyone else is being fed back to them what they want to hear, but not you. You're being fed the true stuff. Everyone else is being fed what they want to hear.
But, you know, weapons of mass destruction thing was a shit show. But, like, so was Vietnam. The American population didn't understand they were being fed a bunch of lies about why we were in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And why we weren't leaving Vietnam.
That is
and
the
why we
question
weren't winning Vietnam.
That is the question I want to return to, which is like, we agree that the media holds a huge amount of sway over people's ideology, what they know about the world, the way that they can digest what's happening about the world, and that it's a major way in which the ruling class gets compliance of people in their own exploitation. Right? We understand that. We're not gonna debate that.
Right.
But
and in simpler times with fewer media outlets, it must have been easier for the state to manage the propaganda, because you literally just have to tell Walter Cronkite what to say versus, like, you know, incept it into like 65,000 different Ben Shapiros. Right? Like, this has got to be more difficult to manage.
It is probably you certainly have to have more sophisticated ways of doing it. But I will say, like, two things. One is, like you said, Glenn Greenwald claims that this type of rapid change about an issue is impossible. And I don't know if there was a rapid change about Vietnam in the same way, but it certainly the political establishment didn't want young people marching by the hundreds of thousands about the Vietnam War. So there was a counterculture, a very successful, like almost very nearly revolutionary counter movement to the establishment in probably the most tightly restricted media environment in history.
Well, but that tightly restricted media environment produced the Pentagon Papers.
Yes.
So was that because they had already realized they lost, like similar to the New York Times now saving face in Israel, that sort of the politics had already shifted enough that traditional mainstream media controlled by the corporate elite, even though it's probably maybe less oligarchic than it is now, we're like, well, I guess we'll let the Pentagon Papers through now because this is now where the population, this is how we're going to manage the population.
Yeah.
Giving them this. Or was there an actual revolutionary work happening in mainstream media?
I mean, it's hard to say. Like, maybe you don't get to have that tight media environment if you don't occasionally have the Pentagon Papers. Like, you need these things to act in unison for it to be useful. And that was really what happened with the New York Times. I think Iraq to some extent, but like their complicity with the genocide in Gaza has completely destroyed their legitimacy. And that's why you get Nick Kristof talking about the rape of Palestinians, because it's not a useful, it's a very expensive thing for no one to believe anything it says.
Yeah. Well, just to bring it back to Walter Cronkite, apparently at one point during the Tet Offensive, he actually said, what the hell is this is on air. What the hell is going on? I thought we were winning this war. There's a little bit less maybe polished media training back then.
I guess so. Anyway.
We digress. Stop alienating our listenership.
Who could believe a thing this man said? So another thing I would say about this is there is a lot of independent media. The independent media is certainly saying things that the political establishment isn't 100% excited about. How much of it is truly revolutionary, though?
Right.
How much of it is stuff that doesn't just threaten to, like, it seems to me that like every sort of like acceptable group in capitalist society has their like media bubble or media sphere, and with some overlap, but there's none of it is like, it's all like counter-revolutionary type. Even the stuff that's really against, and I listen to some of it myself, but like a lot of like the sort of the dirtbag left stuff is like fueled by cynicism, and it's fueled by like, I hate these electeds, but then there's an elected that comes along and it's excitement about the elected, and it goes back to being cynicism. And it's really not the kind of media that's like informing people of how to like directly undermine the system. And I think that's in part because like Glenn Greenwald says this is the audience doing it to the media figures and not vice versa. It's a little bit more dialectical than that, and probably a lot of times it's a lot more of the media figure doing it to the audience and vice versa. But that's certainly true of legacy media.
It's funny that he'd have that opinion given that he's the Substack author.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess he would say that he's found an audience that wants to be challenged, and he's one of the few lucky ones that they want to be challenged in the way that he will challenge them by telling them things that they don't want to hear. Like we do, like we're very lucky that way as well. And us and our 3 listeners, and no, I'm just kidding. But there's also there's a legitimate fear of reprisal. Right. The state still does wield a significant level of influence over these people because they're not going to put stuff out there that's going to put a target on their back. They're just trying to make a living at the end of the day. They're not trying to build a movement.
Yeah.
And some of them are honest about that they support movements, but they're not the figure that's building a movement. They're the figure that has a sort of a parasocial relationship with people who maybe are at least in that movement or building that movement. I think that's an important distinction too. You're not going to get a media environment abstracted from actual social movements
right.
that is revolutionary. And so you get changes in opinion, but those opinions will still exist within an acceptable.
Yeah, that's interesting because trust in media in the early to mid 70s was very high, and it was because you're coming off of the Pentagon Papers and Watergate. So trust in government was really low, but there were these there was this sort of heyday of, oh my gosh, we can trust our media. There's also when TV, there was significant money and advertising money going into TV news, and significantly more money going into content creation for TV. But anyways, the way you're talking about this, it makes me think about all the social movement that actually ended Vietnam and actually got Nixon out was more critical and was a larger agent than Daniel Ellsberg or more important than the way the media covered these things. The social movement was more important. But then there was sort of, I think, and you wonder what the role of people feeling relieved and good about mainstream media and that they can trust it, how that might have calmed the waters, co-opted the movement, sent people to be oh, I'll just watch my news and drive my Subaru and, fly into the 80s. Everything's okay. But that's a reassurance. It's a release valve for the system.
It is indeed. And there's all of those social movements you're talking about had their own media operations associated with them.
I know, but I've read those papers. When can I call this?
I'm not saying that those are obviously propaganda.
Yes.
Right.
But I mean, I love it. I can respect it. It's not journalism though.
Sometimes it is, but more importantly, those exist because no one in these social movements is saying everyone needs to watch Cronkite tonight. They're saying that there's stuff that exists in the mainstream media environment that what is there is not sufficient.
Yes.
And we need to create our own because people need to have access to information or at least talking points or at least some kind of propaganda. And I use that term in a value neutral way.
Gone through the capitalist washing machine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's still something missing there. And then if that audience is convinced that they don't need the SDS's newspaper because they have Walter Cronkite and that Cronkite seems like a pretty reliable guy after all, that's not good. Right.
And then they, as things feel the tension is released, Nixon's gone, Vietnam War's over, we like our TV news. It seems less critical to be involved in feet on the ground in the social movement. Money and time goes away from it. So suddenly now, instead of maybe building an alternative infrastructure to actually deliver journalism, you're just well, I'll just grab my newspaper and watch the 7 p.m. news or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that is what we saw.
So just to put a cap on it, do we live in a media environment today which allows people to get closer to what the actual reality of the world is than we did when legacy media ran things? I think that's the question. Yeah. Do you agree with Glenn Greenwald's premise that even though there's a lot of incentives on independent media to pander either to their audience or to their funders, that the extensive list of people on the menu gives you a better chance of figuring out what's actually happening?
So I struggle with this question because when I wrote the piece on this, my initial instinct was the decline of traditional media and the age of the dawn of the internet when everyone was excited about the democratic power promise of the internet, that was forward movement, that wrestling away the ability to inform people about what's going on and learn about what's going on and give insights about what's going on. Taking that away from corporate powers is a positive thing. Even if you lose like institutional credibility or infrastructure, like the best research in the world, like even if it's like maybe the quote unquote quality of the content production suffers slightly, it's much better to have it happening at like more democratized. I think that promise was eaten alive by like surveillance capitalism and the content economy, the attention economy.
Yeah.
Like that is completely been destroyed by the things that govern how we produce and consume content. And that probably was destroyed like 10 years ago. Like this is like, we're in a long trajectory of just like what has happened to content and ideas and consumption of ideas and the tribalism of like the people who have ideas like you. Like we are like a decade into the impact of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's very deliberate what it's done to the population and who controls the data and the content creators. So I'm very skeptical that there's a romantic version of true alternative media that we're experiencing in this landscape. Even with people like alternative voices like Glenn Greenwald, and even with clearly like citizen journalism showing some things happening in real time unfolding, like in Gaza.
Yeah. Or in Minneapolis.
In Minneapolis. And I'm very thankful that that's happened. But you look at this with the Black Lives Matter movement too, and they're like, suddenly we have all this footage because of all the cameras that are around. And like, what has it changed? So I worry that it's a bit of a false. I worry that this is another like false salve or relief valve.
Yeah.
Because something much deeper is broken around generating and sharing factual information upon which people can have genuine conversations about their lives.
Yeah.
That feels actually inaccessible. No matter whether is it great that we have ZDO News now? Like, fine. Like, I'm glad. Like, but I also feel particularly equipped to navigate this sort of media landscape, and it's still hellish and confusing. And I don't believe I'm getting real information most of the time. Anyways, I can't even imagine navigating it with lower skills or lower time or lower energy. So I think it's very self-serving of Glenn kind of to have this position. It would be very positive to be like, oh, look, it'll be okay. We have Substacks now. I don't think it's okay. I think that the distrust in institutions and the distrust in facts, although maybe reasonable given like how much capitalism has fucked everything up, is very concerning for the population to not trust anything.
Yeah.
And Substacks won't save us. And the fact that you don't have like trained journalists who can be on the ground in a war zone and actually be able to like wire a story to a newspaper is concerning. Like some of the loss of the actual traditional institutions is actually kind of like it's almost like a de-evolution of like humans' ability to like
it actually
manage global news.
It literally is back to a time where like a guy in your town had a newspaper and his ideas were in that newspaper, and another guy in your town was like, fuck that guy, and started his own news. Like it's back to like an old era of media.
If you look at U.S. history, the periods where we had the most political polarization and violence, that is how media was in the United States. Now it happened to coincide with like technology allowed like more printing press to happen, and also didn't have like great telegram, and like there weren't like statewide and national papers because we didn't have that technology. So like there's technological reasons that it aligns, but like that's what people were doing. They were pissed at each other all the time because they were getting like John's version versus Jim's version, and they did not have shared facts.
Mm-hmm.
And it, the excuse that everything that's happening in Israel and Lebanon, Iran is we don't know anything, everything's fog of war. I'm skeptical of that because there have been during World War II and afterwards, there was journalists had very sophisticated infrastructure to actually be able to report from war zones, to actually be able to be in war zones and get their wire out to their editor and do it like, and have multiples of them and like get real information and have that be the vetted source of information. Now, could have still been bullshit, but like now it almost feels like that we're like, oh yeah, that's gone. We don't do that anymore. Everything's fog of war. Who knows what's going on?
Yeah.
It's like, well, we've backslid then. Like, we've gotten worse at this.
Yes, 100%. I would say, I agree with all of what you said, and I would say the what's happened is that there's a monoculture that's part of like the shared factual reality, which is broken down, and the response from the political establishment was to transform individual people into the word's escaping me, but it's something like when they take all of this information, they find out that like these sets of like behaviors or ideas collect into a profile, and then they can repeat that they can sort of fit you in a box and get you to go into that box a little bit more. It seems to me that there is a media environment for like all of the major US profiles, like ideological profiles, and those profiles exist not because they're part of like a national discourse to get at the root of what's actually happening. Those exist to be sold things to as a consumer. They're consumer profiles, first and foremost. And as long as you interact with media as a consumer that's being sold a set of things that you like the product, you're willing to pay for it, you like that other people that you like it, all that kind of stuff, you're not going to be able to escape from being told things that are against your interests, essentially. Because the thing that you need to know cannot be sold to you. You can't receive it as a consumer. You can only receive it as a comrade. And I think, my experience doing politics is that there's something very important about like a shared vision of what you believe that's outward facing, and then a hot debate about that inward facing. There's like a dialectical relationship between like the discipline of carrying forward a message and then the freedom of like really tearing into it, and nothing is sacred, you're not going to get canceled and all that stuff. And within a group, those kinds of political vehicles, I think, give you a much higher chance of having a sophisticated understanding of your own beliefs, right? And also the ability to like work towards something more effectively. So that's been my experience. But in general, I would say that like you have to understand that your favorite podcast, us not included, cannot tell you what will set you free, because they are mostly trying to sell you a product. Like you have to find it in some other way.
Yeah, I think
probably face to face with someone who like has your best interest at heart and has a very different story to tell you about reality than you've heard from anywhere in the news media.
Yeah, I mean that gets into the stuff that we talked about with like synthesis and how information, you need differences of thought and opinion and experience to rub into each other to get to a better idea. And if your media consumption is only consumption tailored to your user persona, you're not getting facts, and you're not helping your brain to develop insights or understand material reality. There's a second part of this. It's like, well, what structures do you need in place as a society to gather facts on the ground and turn them into news, which I think we've also destroyed. And I think you do need both, but I completely agree. I also think that this sort of anxiety predicament that everyone finds themselves in, that forces them to, and actually Glenn Greenwald gets into this a little bit, but this identity anxiety that everyone's got, where you're like, you need to have the group, you need to buy the product, you need to consume the right thing. You're trying to fill this hole about who you are. That's a bottomless pit. And actually the content producers also have this anxiety, which is probably what Glenn Greenwald was like. They're trapped. They're trying to fill a bottomless pit hole because you can't purchase this sort of like way of seeing the world in a more in actual relationship with others. And the reason our podcast is different is because we are comrades, and you are our comrade listener.
Yes, that's right.
And don't you think we should launch a political education website where we curate political education curriculum and help people start in real life book clubs? I think that if you've gotten to this point of the episode and you want to see that happen, you should
become a paid subscriber on our Substack.
And also tell me you want to see that happen, because that's the next project I want to do.
Good deal.
Good deal. So done and dusted.
As you grow old, your powers will fade. As you grow old, you're on the make, and you don't do regret. You're always out for what you can get. You think like a snake, and you ooze like a snail. Let the trail go cold as you swallow your tail. With your low rent skills and your heart of flint, telling your tales that are unfit to print. You're all weasel words, backed up by the boots, obsessed like the rest, with a promise of loot. Your pies will fade as you grow old. Your pies will fade as you grow old. Your pies will fade as you grow old. Your pies will fade as you grow old.
I love you.